Okay, so Alex asked, why wouldn't you paint a sensor all full? So I'm going to use a bit of terminology, which is not particularly technical, which would be the percentage fill. Okay, so this is
like 3D printing.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a 100% fill. I think it's 100 millimeter by 100 millimeter square. So at this scale, this makes a really good sensor. We can clip this onto our touchboard, and we can get a sensor that probably works from about that far away. Right?
Wow.
So, yeah, it's very cool. And it works on both sides. It's works very, very well. But the problem is that if you scale this up to, say, this big, then the sensor will still function, but it starts to be quite slow. And the reason that it's slow, or it feels unresponsive, is because the touchboard, the electrodes here, are literally charging this. And when you wave your hand across it or you touch it, it discharges. And we're measuring that. And that's what gives us the ability to detect at a distance as well, because it'll discharge through the air. And through other materials. So we could hide this under a piece of carpet or something. Right? And count how many people walked into the room. But the problem is that if you make this really big, then you have a lot more capacitance to charge, so it takes longer, and the board has a limit at the rate the rate at which it can charge is limited. So you start to hit that rate. This thing isn't as responsive as it could be. But what we find through a lot of testing is that using a grid allows you to achieve a similar distance in terms of sensing, but you're putting so much less material down. So this is probably like a 5% fill or a 10% fill, that then you're able to achieve the same distance, but it's much more responsive because there's just less material for the board to charge up. Yeah. And so it's not getting around the problem. It's kind of like holding it back a bit. What we've found in testing is that between an 18 and 50% fill is the kind of ideal amount of paint to put down to achieve the best balance between distance and responsiveness. So this is a 50% fill. It is, works quite well. You can see that we have lots of different, amazing, beautiful screen printed designs. And this is one of these moments where we just go, oh, let's do nothing but screen printing because it's just so cool. But a lot of people say, oh, do the shapes make a big difference? At this scale, the shapes don't really make a huge difference. So you could screen print lots of different shapes.
Hexagons.
Hexagons and squares and triangles and whatever, and it doesn't really matter at this scale. But it does actually change the field. So the field that the sensor generates is really an extrusion of the shape. So it's almost like you fill this with air, and it creates a little balloon. It's kind of the shape of this, right? So what you have is a kind of inflated square above this. With yours, you have effectively a bunch of inflated little lines above it. Because my hand is quite big, it interrupts a bunch of those different lines, and it detects me. But if your sensor was only this center strip, if I put my hand here, it wouldn't detect. If I put it there, it wouldn't detect. So the shape doesn't impact it if it's within an area, but you can start to do really clever stuff. And we've started to see some of this where people shape a sensor such that it can only be interacted with in a certain way. And that's because the field is totally controlled by the application of the material. And that kind of project and that kind of investigation that we want to enable with our next set of products, because we can see that there's a huge amount of cool stuff that people can do, but we have to give them that first little step.
So, this is the kind of thing that you'll be including in there?
Yeah. So, in the Pro Kit, we're including pre-printed sensors. They're a bit bigger than these. And that's really about giving people an idea of an appropriate and functional sensor size. It's also about making the onboarding really easy. Because one of the things that I love about what we do is that we get fine artists and serious electrical engineers calling us on the same day. And both of them are really interested. Both of them come at it from different directions. We have to make the onboarding for both of them as easy as possible.
Yeah, you always have that like time to the first aha moment or whatever.
Exactly,
Which,
exactly.
You know, if you have to wait for the paint to dry or like.
And that's one of the things we realized is
Yeah.
that so many people in our community were buying a touchboard and buying some paint and getting like super pumped, and then they paint something and connect it, and it either wouldn't work. Well, most of the time it does work, but it would take an hour, let's say, like, you know, realistically, by the time you kind of do your whole, set everything up. And but sometimes it wouldn't work because they would paint a gigantic sensor. And it wouldn't work.
Especially as your first thing, then you're like, oh, use.
And it's so and it's so frustrating for people, and I really empathize with that.
Yeah.
So by including pre-printed sensors and ways to connect to them, you know, it's really straightforward. Okay, plug this in to a USB power supply, connect this sensor, and then put your hand on it.
Yeah.
And then people go, okay, cool. Yeah.